Today, we're diving deep into a shocking crime from 1919 that absolutely rocked British high society. It's a story about a celebrated war hero, his wife, and a murder right in the heart of London. And it makes you ask some really tough questions about trauma, justice, and sanity. So let's get right into it.
I only wish I had another bullet for myself. Just imagine hearing that. Those were the chilling words from Lieutenant Colonel Norman Rutherford right after the murder. It's a line that just screams desperation, and it hints at the tortured state of mind at the very center of this tragedy. I mean, how does a man like that get to this point?
So let's set the scene. It's the evening of January 13th, 1919. The Great War had ended just a couple of months before. Rutherford shows up at a house where his old friend, Major Miles Seton, is staying. Not even 30 minutes later, Seton is dead. The crime itself was fast, it was brutal, and there was no doubt who did it. But the story behind it? That's a whole tangled web of love, duty, and trauma.
To really understand the why of it all, first we have to understand the who. And at the heart of this whole drama, you've got three main players.
You can really see the contrast in their marriage right here. On one side, you have Lieutenant Colonel Norman Rutherford, a brilliant surgeon, a decorated war hero. And on the other, his wife Alice. She's the daughter of a rich industrialist. They had this whirlwind romance, eloped, and had 6 kids together. I mean, on the surface, they looked like a total power couple. But underneath all that, things were breaking down, especially after Rutherford came home from the war.
And you know, calling Rutherford a hero, it's not an exaggeration. He won the Distinguished Service Order for bravery. But that service came at a horrifying cost. At one point, he was literally buried alive in the trenches. He was eventually sent home with severe shell shock, couldn't sleep, was having suicidal thoughts. And yet, unbelievably, he actually asked to be sent back to the front. This was a man who'd been pushed way past his breaking point.
Which brings us to the motive. While this hero was off at war, he started to believe that his wife, Alice, was having an affair with Major Miles Seton, a man who was supposed to be a friend to both of them. So when he finally gets back to England, he's hit with a request for a divorce. For a man in his fragile mental state, this betrayal, or at least the idea of it, seems to have been the final trigger.
Okay, so the murder itself was never really in doubt. The killer calmly waited for the police to show up. The real question for the court wasn't if he did it, but why. And the trial that followed, well, it became a massive media sensation. For the prosecution, it seemed like a slam-dunk case. Rutherford showed up armed, which suggests he planned it. The famous pathologist Dr. Spilsbury confirmed Seton was shot multiple times, and Rutherford even left a note for his wife that was pretty much a confession. The defense really only had one card to play. Argue that the man who pulled the trigger was not on his right mind, that the war had well and truly broken him.
And you know what? That defense worked. The jury came back with a stunning verdict. Guilty of willful murder, but insane when he did it. And that little legal distinction was about to change everything. Not just for Norman, but for Alice too.
So, because of that insanity verdict, Rutherford didn't go to prison. He was sent to Broadmoor, which was England's most famous high-security psychiatric hospital. His sentence was indefinite. He'd be detained at His Majesty's pleasure. Now, for a lot of people, that would be the end of the story. But for the Rutherfords, this was just the beginning of 2 very, very different next chapters.
So what happens next? What becomes of a convicted murderer who's been deemed insane? And of the woman who is still legally his wife? Well, their paths couldn't have been more different. It's pretty wild.
Rutherford's life inside Broadmoor was not what you'd expect. A member of Parliament who visited him actually argued in public that he didn't seem insane at all. And while he was locked up, Rutherford co-wrote a history of the Great War that was published by Cambridge University Press. His name wasn't allowed on the cover, but this incredible intellectual achievement might have been the very thing that helped him get out.
So, while Norman is busy writing books, Alice is completely trapped. She wants a divorce, obviously, but the law back then threw up this huge roadblock. She couldn't get a full divorce. Instead, she got what's called a judicial separation, which is this frustrating legal limbo where you're separated, but you're still married, so you can't remarry. And let me tell you, Alice fought this for years. She actually won a preliminary divorce, but then it got overturned. She appealed all the way to the House of Lords, the highest court in the country, and she lost. The law literally forced her to stay married to a man the courts themselves had called a criminally insane murderer. To get away from the scandal, she finally just changed her last name back to her maiden name, Roberts.
She just completely retreated from public life, poured everything she had into raising her 6 kids. When a reporter finally asked her if she was lonely living this quiet life, this was her answer. It just speaks volumes, doesn't it? Here's a woman trapped by tragedy and the law, who just decided to find her purpose inside her family.
I mean, just stop and think about the two different paths here. It's staggering. He, the murderer, eventually gets his freedom back, gets his medical license reinstated, and goes on with his career. She, who was caught in the middle of it all, was stuck in a legal nightmare for decades, forced to basically disappear from society just to get some peace. The contrast is just incredible.
So, how did this all end? The final chapter of their lives is just as compelling as the rest, and it leaves us with some really powerful lingering questions.
Okay, here's how their stories wrapped up. Norman gets released in 1929, after about 10 years in Broadmoor. But it wasn't until 1938, almost 20 years after the murder, that he and Alice were finally officially divorced. He ended up dying in South Africa in 1951. And Alice, once she finally got her freedom, she remarried and lived an incredibly long life, passing away at 100 years old.
And there's one last haunting detail. When he died, Norman Rutherford's one request was that his tin hat from the trenches be buried with him. It's such a powerful symbol. It's like the war never, ever truly left him. From the moment he was buried alive in the ground to the moment he was buried for good, the trauma of the Great War defined his entire life.
And that brings us right back to the question at the heart of this whole thing. In a story filled with trauma, passion, and the cold letter of the law, where do you draw the line? Where does the damage from trauma end, and where does personal responsibility begin? The courts gave their answer back in 1919, but it's a question that feels just as complicated and just as haunting today.